Somewhere in a cave in Israel, scientists found a burnt seed that is 790,000 years old. Not a fossil. Not a footprint. A single, tiny, charred seed. And that one seed rewrote everything we thought we knew about when humans first controlled fire. Here's the strange part, there's no photograph of the moment it happened. No witness. No date carved into stone. So how do scientists figure out something like this, something that happened before language, before writing, before almost anything we'd call human? The answer is one of the greatest detective stories in the history of science. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how a burnt seed, a pile of ash, and a few cracked bones can tell us the story of the single invention that made us who we are. Before we get to the clues, it helps to understand why this question matters so much. Fire isn't just one invention among many. It's arguably the invention that made every other invention possible. Cooking food unlocked more calories and more nutrients than our ancestors could get from raw meat and plants alone. More calories meant our bodies could afford to grow something incredibly expensive to run, a bigger brain. Fire also meant light after sunset, which meant more time to be awake, to talk, to plan, to bond. And it meant protection. Predators don't wander into a lit campsite. In other words, if you want to know when humans started becoming human in the modern sense, you have to know when they tamed fire. Here's the challenge scientists face. Fire happens naturally all the time, lightning strikes, wildfires, volcanic activity. So finding ash in an ancient site doesn't prove humans made that fire on purpose. Maybe it was just a wildfire that swept through, and humans happened to live there afterward. To prove humans controlled fire, researchers need something much more specific: repeated fire in the same exact spot, evidence that it was maintained over time, and signs that it was used for something: cooking, toolmaking, warmth. It's the difference between finding smoke damage in a house and finding an actual fireplace built with intention. So let's follow the clues, starting with one of the oldest strong candidates, Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. Deep inside this cave, far from where lightning could ever reach, archaeologists found ash and burned bone fragments dating back roughly 1 million years. The key detail is location. This wasn't near the cave entrance, where a wildfire could have blown in. It was deep inside, in a spot only accessible if someone deliberately carried fire in. Researchers also found the plant ash showed signs of burning at low, controlled temperatures, consistent with a small maintained fire, not an intense uncontrolled blaze. It's one of the strongest pieces of evidence that early humans, likely Homo erectus, already had some grasp of fire a million years ago. So now back to that burnt seed from the beginning of this video. It comes from a site called Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel, dated to around 790,000 years ago. What makes this site remarkable is the sheer density of burned material concentrated in small clusters: burnt wood, burnt flint tools, and burnt seeds, all found together in tight patches rather than scattered randomly across the landscape. Wildfires torch everything indiscriminately across a wide area. But these burn marks were clustered exactly where you'd expect a hearth to be, repeated over different layers of time, meaning generations of the same group came back to the same spot to build fire, again and again. That's not an accident. That's a habit. And habits are exactly what culture is made of. Halfway across the world, in a cave near Beijing called Zucudian, scientists studying Homo erectus remains found something else: ash layers alongside burned and cracked animal bones, some dated to around 400,000 years ago. Cracked, burned bone is a strong signal, because when bone is heated it doesn't just blacken, it changes structurally in ways a natural wildfire passing through rarely produces. Combined with stone tools nearby clearly used for butchering, the picture starts to look like something very specific: not survivors of a fire, but people using fire to cook their food. Put all this together, and here's the surprising conclusion: humans probably didn't invent fire all at once. They likely started by capturing wildfires that were already burning nearby, and keeping them alive, feeding a flame, protecting it, carrying embers from place to place, long before anyone knew how to create fire from scratch. Only much later, somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 years ago, does the evidence become truly widespread and consistent, showing that fire had become a daily, dependable tool across many human groups, not just a rare and lucky event. In other words, fire wasn't a single lightning bolt invention. It was a slow relationship, thousands of generations long, between humans and something they didn't fully control yet, until eventually, they did. Once fire became reliable, everything sped up. Cooked meat and plants are dramatically easier to chew and digest, which means our ancestors' guts could shrink over generations while their brains grew larger, since digestion is expensive and brains need enormous energy. Some researchers even argue that cooking food is the single biggest reason humans developed such unusually large brains compared to other primates. Fire also stretched the day. Before fire, once the sun went down, there wasn't much to do except sleep. Firelight created the first version of what we might call evening time, a space for talking, storytelling, and passing down knowledge verbally, which many anthropologists believe is where oral tradition, and maybe even the earliest forms of culture, truly began. Here's the twist that tends to surprise people the most: for hundreds of thousands of years, humans could keep fire alive, but they likely could not yet create it from nothing. Making fire on demand, through friction or sparking stones, appears in the archaeological record much later, and some researchers argue reliable fire-starting technology may not have been widespread until around 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. That means for an almost unimaginable stretch of time, fire was something ancient humans desperately protected rather than something they could simply make. Losing your fire wasn't a minor inconvenience. It could mean walking for days, searching for another group's flame just to relight your own. So the next time you flick a lighter without a second thought, remember, that tiny, effortless spark took our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years to fully master. A burnt seed, a cracked bone, a patch of ash in the back of a cave, these are the fingerprints of one of humanity's first, and greatest, breakthroughs. Not a single flash of genius, but a slow, patient relationship with fire that quite literally shaped the brains inside our skulls today.